Welcome to our first December roundtable. Joining us this morning, our Democratic political analyst, Mary. I know you're shaking your head. It's already December. I know. All right, can't even process that. Republican political analyst Rob Gray. It's great to see you guys. Thanks for coming in. Let's start with John Santiago. You know, as Charmin said, he won election for state rep. He ran for a mayor. Boston, he dropped out. So what do you think his future in politics holds here?
I think he's going to have a lot of options. I mean, this is a statewide office he's holding, position rather. He's getting great accolades across the state from elected officials, veterans, people who live in the communities that serve veterans and all that. And when he's done, whenever that is, I think he's going to have a lot of options to explore in terms of running for another office another day.
You know, Rob, I understand life is not checking boxes, but he checks a lot of boxes, does he not?
Sure. I mean, the good thing is he's a physician, so he doesn't need the job. He doesn't need the position. Maybe he learned something from running in the past and losing for mayor. Let's say the mayor gets elected to another term. Maybe Santiago comes in, 4 years after.
All right. Well, this holiday weekend offers a bit of a break from a highly charged political moment. For Governor Maura Healey, it's been a test. The Democratic supermajority on Beacon Hill has not provided smooth sailing for some key policies. Now, she campaigned really hard for Kamala Harris and Joyce Craig. We know how that went. Now, with the incoming Trump administration, money from Washington could get tight. What is her best course of action here, Rob?
Well, first of all, I think Kamala Harris's loss is the number one political story in Massachusetts this year. Why? Because it denied Governor Healey and other Democrats upward mobility, cabinet appointments, whatever it was, all the way down the Democratic chain. There were opportunities potentially if Kamala Harris was president and they got appointed. So they're all staying put. So what does the governor want to do is the question. She's in good shape. She has popularity near 60%, so her approval is good. I think she should be a raging moderate, just like Charlie Baker. That's the key to success. If she wants to get reelected, that's how she'll do it.
A raging moderate, Marianne. What do you think?
Well, first, I'm not sure she would have taken a post if Kamala Harris had prevailed, so put that there.
She was out campaigning for Kamala Harris everywhere, so I'm not so sure. But
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a good thing to do to help other colleagues out and Democrats up and down the ticket. So there's that. Second, I think if I'm Maura Healey, I'm going to make sure I keep delivering for the people of Massachusetts. And the people who determine the money in Washington is Congress. They have appropriations, they have budget, they control the purse strings. Massachusetts, as we talked last week, has a great congressional delegation with a lot of clout and a lot of opportunities to get money. And that's where she's going to have to go to lean on the delegation to get the funding that Joe Biden gave her in addition to what Congress does.
Interesting thing on the delegation, Ed Markey is up in 2026 in the Senate race. So how does the governor play this? Maybe another Democrat gets in and primaries Ed Markey. So where are her loyalties and how does she navigate that? Could be an interesting developing story.
I mean, she's never been shy about endorsing, as we know, in Massachusetts and elsewhere. We'll see how that race plays out. But, 2026 is going to be pretty interesting.
So that's in 2026. But in 2025, there is a Boston mayor race. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu faces similar challenges. She also faces that re-election run in 2025. Progressive politics didn't exactly make the sale in 2024. Marianne, will she have to pivot more to the center, or would that just blow up her brand?
So Michelle Wu is focused on a number of issues, but in particular, public safety and public transportation. That's not a left issue. That's not a right issue. That's a quality of life issue. And that gets you every time. So she's really doing things that people who live in Boston want her to do and like what she's doing. And that's why her numbers are so good. For people who don't live in Boston, like if you own a restaurant in the North End and other people, they're not so happy, but they don't live in Boston like many people do. So to that end, she's doing all the things that people live in Boston want to see in terms of quality of life and trying to reduce costs too. But public safety, public transportation, any mayor would kill for that.
In 2025, obviously the election's at the end of 2025, but it'll be Trump 2.0. It'll be the second run of Donald Trump as the president of the United States while she's the mayor of Boston. Will that complicate things at all?
Well, I think the good news for the mayor is Boston's a Democratic city, so that the Trump lane in Boston for a challenger is, as narrow as she and Marty Walsh have made the streets of Boston with all these bike lanes.
Good point by you.
Taking away the parking. But there is quality of life. I mean, traffic is an issue. Bike lanes are an issue. A major tax increase on business that the mayor is in the process of putting through. could be an issue. She's pretty well positioned, but a challenger, might have their day. We'll see. They'd have to spend a lot of money.
The business owners' taxes, none of them live in Boston either. So I think it's important.
But they could give to an opponent.
They could.
I mean, I think the mayor's well positioned, but they could.
They could, but I think it's important to remember the people who live in Boston like the job she's doing.
All right, Doge, I can't believe I just said that, is the big buzzword in Washington right now. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, looking to slash federal spending by $2 trillion. Last we checked, a lot of that money goes to red states as well. Is President-elect Trump setting up a good cop, bad cop scenario here? What do you think, Marianne?
Well, here's the beauty of it. Clearly, Elon and Vivek never took civics or anything else in high school because guess who controls the money? Congress, appropriations and budget. They can say or do whatever they want. It's never going to happen. That's not how any of this works. So they can, the two of them, so efficient, two of them leading it, can offer all the $1 trillion cuts they want and everything else. In the end, it'll be up to Congress. How much money people get, how much is going to be spent.
Control, and you don't think
there will be a one vote difference when everyone gets done counting all these congressional seats. So Democrats had to bail out Republicans for the last 2 years even to get a continuing resolution to fund the government. There's going to be a lot. It's going to be very interesting to see how much Democrats are willing to help there.
What do you think?
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, does anybody think that the federal government runs efficiently? I don't think so. And I think Americans are looking forward to it. Polls out this week show the president's transition at 60% approval. Americans like ideas like this. The only thing is, in the past, Simpson Bowles, Graham Rudman, there have been all these Washington commissions that are going to deal with the budget that have all tried and failed. We'll see if Trump can do it.
No.
We continue on the record. Stay with us.